Thank you so much for joining us today for today's webinar, Creating an Inclusive Classroom, presented by Dr. Manuel Rosa, graduate school professor and advisor. We are so pleased to have him as a presenter, and we're so pleased you were able to join us for this wonderful topic. So it is our pleasure to introduce to you today's presenter, Dr. Rosa.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Those of you who are watching live and those of you who are watching on record. Once again, I'm Dr. Manuel Rosa, and today we're going to talk about a conversation I'm very passionate about, and that is creating an inclusive classroom. For this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the laws that have prompted us to take a different look at our classrooms, talk about inclusive classroom, not only in terms of students with disabilities, but also for diversity and for culture. So hopefully you'll enjoy this presentation. If you have any questions, please put that in the chat. I don't have access to it, but I know one of the facilitators at some point will just tell me your question, and we will have questions at the end as well. So if you have a story you want to share as well, we can try and do that too. So I like to put some quotes in our presentations and some cartoons. So I thought this stuck out for me as we see a student that is in a wheelchair trying to board a bus. And sorry, Mrs. Jones, when we said all the kids were going, we didn't mean Johnny. Leave no child behind. So decades ago, that was part of the logic of teaching and the teaching philosophy. A lot of students were placed in different classrooms and not integrated with each other. So there's lots of studies and lots of research shows that students perform better, all students perform better when being in an inclusive classroom. So this is something that was a philosophy years ago, but now with legislation and with teaching philosophies changing, hopefully not the case. So what is inclusion? And there are many different definitions out there that talk about inclusion and the various diverse needs. But for the purposes of this workshop, we're going to talk about inclusion refers to the provision of quality instruction through an appropriate delivery system and relevant support to students with disabilities so they have access to the general education classroom and curriculum to achieve positive educational outcomes. And the key words there are the quality instruction and the appropriate delivery. And we're going to be talking and reflecting back on some of our previous webinars when we talked about differentiated instruction and how we treat students individually and we instruct them individually, and that's why it's important for differentiated instruction. So we'll be referring back to our other webinars as well. So there are some assumptions historically in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. What were some of the assumptions our education and the leaders and society was thinking? Number one, students are responsible for their own learning. Number two, when students do not learn, there is something wrong with them. So it's not the teacher's fault. It's not a combination of both. It's not parents. There's just something wrong with them. And number three, schools must figure out what's wrong with as much precision as possible so that students can be directed to the track, curriculum, teachers, and classrooms that match their learning ability profile. Otherwise, no learning will occur. So as you reflect on your education, and you could put it in the chat and we'll talk about it later. But do you see that these assumptions were a philosophy in your school, or were they blatant or obvious or hidden? So think about that as we go through our slides. So the Individuals with Disability Act was created in order to address the needs of the population. And what this act does makes available a free appropriate education to eligible children with disabilities throughout the nation and ensures special education and related services to those children. So now these children are not in a bubble or in a separate classroom. To the maximum extent, appropriate children with disabilities are educated with children who are not disabled, and that special classes, separate schooling, or other removal of children with disabilities from the regular environment occurs only when the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be attained satisfactorily. So that is one of the main clauses and main purpose of the IDEA Act, to make sure that all students are treated equal. And just some history behind where we are and where the growth is. In 1970, and this is in millions, in 1976, the number of students served that identified themselves as students with disabilities were 3,694,000. And in the past 30 years, you can see how that has now doubled to 6.5 million, and that's of 2015, those numbers are reported. So the number of students being served has increased dramatically. And so it is important that we pay careful attention to that. And also going on with the trend, the percentage of students who spend 80% or more time in general education in 1989 was 31%, meaning 80% of the time or more spent in the classroom. And now 2014, that number has also doubled. So we have students, more students who have identified as student with disabilities, but at the same time, the push and to be in an inclusive classroom and be part of the regular curriculum has also doubled. And then finally, I'm sure most of you are aware of these, but just as an FYI for those of you who may be new to the curriculum, these are the 13 types of disabilities that are under the IDEA Act. So just have these in your wheelhouse. If you download the PowerPoint, just so you know what's covered. And the state of Florida also has a good, has some definitions of what types of disabilities and what they consider that as well. So I always like to share some statistics to show what can happen and why it's important to study this, why it's important that all students, regardless of their ability, their sexual orientation, their race, their color, their creed, their religion, why it's important that students feel welcome and why they feel as if their teachers in their classrooms are accepting of them. And according to the National Science Educational Statistics Survey, 40.5% of students feel student disruptive behavior prevents learning. So if you don't have an inclusive classroom, if students are bullying each other, or are being negative or hostile, it's going to prevent learning. The CDC survey indicates 9 to 10% of students regularly miss school because of fear from unsafe learning environments. 10% of students drop out of school because of persistent bullying, and 90% of 4th to 8th graders report experiencing serious bullying. And this is a part of our inclusive classroom, and we will talk more about this, because students, if they don't feel accepted, if they are bullied and feeling isolated, then that is going to have a negative impact. And I'm sure those of you that are teaching now and on the line have had some experiences with this. But now we have some new assumptions. Now that we've seen that the push for more inclusion, now we can have some new assumptions. Inclusion is about changing schooling experiences for students with disabilities. Inclusion is a good that redress the discriminatory and disenfranchising educational practices of the past. Schools needed to develop a consensus about educating students with disabilities and adopt a shared mission that included them. And then teachers needed to work together collaboratively to create successful learning experience and outcomes for students with disabilities. So the hope is, and the goal is, that the climate and the school climate and the teachings that are going on for new teachers are that these are the new assumptions. So what is, when you think about a diverse classroom and you think about diversity, what comes to mind? What do you think of when you have the diverse classroom? I believe it's where individuals of different race, ethnicity, religious beliefs, socioeconomic status, language, geographical origin, gender, and or sexual orientation bring their different knowledge, background, experience, and interests for the benefit of everyone. So it's important, even today it's February 28th. It is Black History Month, the last day of Black History Month. March is Women's History Month. So just even recognizing and celebrating these different heritage months can lead to promoting more inclusivity in your classrooms. And why? Why do we even care? Why should we even address it? Why should we have these new assumptions? Well, there's better education in diverse populations. The studies show that students work better in more diverse environments. Students feel safer. Students learn more about different cultures and backgrounds, and this makes them more comfortable. And as I stated previously, there's a reminder of statistics. Number of students with disabilities who spend most of their day in the general education classroom has gone from 33% to 62%. So it's something we can't ignore. It's something we can't avoid. This is something that all teachers in their teaching philosophy should be having, and that is to create an inclusive classroom that caters to a diverse population of students. So what is culture? Culture is going to be another aspect of creating an inclusive classroom, and culture for each of your students, what their values are, what their beliefs are, their behaviors, and their attitudes, all that are going to coincide and shape the individual person. And it's important that when we look at students and we look at our curriculum, that we look at students as these individuals being shaped and molded. And they're getting these beliefs. It could be from you as a teacher. It could be from the administration. There's going to be some influence from parents and from peers, and fortunately or unfortunately, from social media. So we need to keep in mind that all this is going to create a student's identity and their culture. So teachers have a particular responsibility to recognize and structure their lessons to reflect student differences. And this goes back to differential learning. This encourages students to recognize themselves and others as individuals. Learning involves transfer of information from prior knowledge and experience. To assist in this transfer process, it is important to acknowledge that students' backgrounds and to validate and incorporate their previous knowledge into the process of acquiring new information. So we cannot ignore students' backgrounds or avoid it. As I've stated previously, it's something that we need to tackle head on. And when I talk to my students who are teachers, one of the first most important things I tell them is that they really need to recognize, to look inside themselves and recognize what their biases are, what maybe their stereotypical thinking may be, and then work within themselves and try and prevent that and promote acceptance. So it first starts, before you can do any of this, you need to think about what you're saying through your verbals and through your nonverbals that may be not promoting inclusion and making students feel isolated. So what are the benefits to an inclusive classroom? In the ideal world, if everybody was getting along and feeling accepted, it would lead to more instructional time because there'd be less disruptions and less arguments. Fewer absences because students will feel accepted, feel like the curriculum is speaking to them and want to go to school. Ultimately, with more instructional time and fewer absences, that should lead to better post-secondary outcomes. Social benefits to non-disabled students as they learn to form positive relationships and better relate to a variety of people. So this doesn't only help students with disabilities, but also students without disabilities, because they are all getting along and learning from each other. Differentiating instruction geared to each student's unique learning style. Reduce stigma since everyone is viewed as having unique learning needs. And then high expectations for all, since the goals for all students should be based on state academic standards. And this is another key point. There are many studies that show that students and teachers, whether intentionally or not, their words will create self-fulfilling prophecies. So if you lower the expectations for the students, and this happens a lot with Hispanic and Latino students, then they're going to believe that and they're not going to achieve the high expectations. So it's important that you have high expectations for all students, but what varies is the level of support. Some students will need more support, some students will need less support, but high expectations needs to be set for all the students in the classroom. Some more benefits: students with disabilities have the opportunity for experiencing full citizenship in school and the community, forming a wide circle of friends, experiencing academic challenges, enjoying the satisfaction of achievements, especially if you're recognizing those in your classroom often, learning to rely more on friends than teachers. And we want to promote that. And each student's going to be different and their level of comfort is going to be different, but we want to try and promote students who are not comfortable socializing, pushing them in that direction. Because at the end of the day, we're also preparing them for the real world, for jobs, and this is going to be inevitable. Taking new risks, and then finding they can master activities they may not have tried in special education classes. So what does the inclusive classroom look like? And we're going to talk about some characteristics of an inclusive classroom. And if you are teaching right now and listening to this, use this as like an internal checklist. Whether you're right now, are you implementing these things, and to what degree are you? It's perfectly acceptable not to be, and this is why we're having this webinar, to give ideas, and maybe you are already doing all this, so it'd be nice if you can share some of these best practices in the chat that we can review in the end. But characteristics: assuring the classroom is usable by students with differing characteristics, including accessible workstations, appropriate lighting, and acoustic characteristics. Creating an environment where all students feel comfortable expressing their opinions, including research and writing from authors of diverse backgrounds. Using multiple teaching methods to aid the academic success of students with varying learning styles. Encouraging critical thinking and academic excellence in a respectful environment. And ensuring that all activities, materials, and equipment are physically accessible to and usable by all. So right off the bat, just doing these things, and some of them are, especially the physical classroom, are going to be very quickly you can implement that. But when you're creating assignments, making sure that the research and the writing and the curriculum that you use is from diverse authors is an important component of creating the inclusive classroom. So what does it look like? At the end of the day, if a student is in an inclusive classroom and having inclusive education, what does that look like? Well, there are three things I want you to think about. First of all, membership. How the child interacts with the group, with the school, with the classroom, and with the community. When we see membership, the student interaction, then we know that we have taken steps for the students to feel inclusive. How a child interacts on a one-on-one basis, especially those students who have problems socializing and interacting with their peers. If we see that that has increased, then that is also a positive outcome. And then of course, the final outcome, skills. So if they've improved in their performance, on their test scores, on their assessments, both informal and formal, or just from your everyday observations, then that means that you're on your way for an inclusive education. So membership, relationship, and skills are how you're gonna know and be able to measure what type of classroom you have created and what type of environment you've created. So here's some step-by-step tips, and we've talked about a lot of these, but these are now more step-by-step that you can follow when creating an inclusive classroom. The first tip is to start with the IEPs, the individual education plans. You want to make sure you carefully review each one, pay close attention to exceptionalities, goals, provisions, and accommodations, and check goals to see if you need to collect data. So the IEPs is where you start. So we did a workshop on time management, and one of the suggestions was to create folders. Could be for individual students or for your IEPs, or create a calendar where you can write down, what are some of the goals and provisions you have for the week or for the month, or ongoing. But it's very important you lay out all your IEPs so you know exactly what you need to do and what you need to cover. Then you want to check your room arrangement. And this is something you can do even tomorrow. Factor in space between desks and tables for wheelchairs. Make sure classroom items are within reach. And low vision students or students that have problems seeing with glasses should be seating in the front, and printouts will need larger fonts. And you also want to be careful. My nephew does not wear glasses because he doesn't think they're cool and he can't see anything. So you want to also, if you see a student squinting and they don't admit to having vision problems, you want to use your judgment, and then also make some arrangements for those students as well. Make a logical seating chart. So there are two ways: intermingle at-risk students with higher achieving students, so that way they can do some peer tutoring and peer mentoring, or you can group students by ability, and this is where differentiated instruction and learning takes place, where you will have all the students with one outcome, needing to learn one objective, but the activities you give will differ based on the students' levels of ability in the classroom. So those are two strategies you can use. Create a schedule that includes services. So if some of your students are going to be taken out of class for speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, counseling, or social skills, if you want to do your main material or the material you really want to come across, you want to try and create a schedule where that's covered when all the students are present. And then you want to work with other personnel to minimize missing important content. So wherever they go, the speech therapist, the occupational therapist, maybe they can incorporate what you're teaching into whatever they're teaching or whatever they're talking about. You want to choose the right materials, find out the resources the school district has available. Of course, you being here already demonstrates that you have an eager to learn and you're willing to learn, and the Multidisciplinary Center has tons of resources available. So this is one great resource that you're already familiar with. Collaborate with a special education teacher. So if there is one that's been identified, you can collaborate with them. And if you are one, then collaborating with your general education classroom. And then, of course, think outside the box. Don't be afraid to experiment, to try different activities, to see if it promotes student learning. But just make sure you take notes and you share that with your other fellow faculty members. So here's one lesson you can start with. A webinar we've done was focused on morning meetings and the importance of morning meetings, and starting off today with some structure and with some ability for student interaction and reviewing expectations. So this may be an activity you could do in a morning meeting and start the conversation about students talking about their differences and similarities. So you can present 4 or 5 criteria statements for the class to consider, and then ask them to stand up in groups. All the 6-year-olds stand up. Everyone wearing tennis shoes stands up. If you like baseball, stand up. Stand up if you have any freckles on your skin. And then this just starts the conversation going, what are other differences that the criteria did not address? Why is it important to share these differences? And most importantly, what are the similarities, and why is it okay to be different? Depending on your grade level and your comfortability, these questions can be less challenging or more challenging, but you want to set some ground rules, and we're going to talk about ground rules later on. So here are 8 tips for introducing a student with disabilities to a general education classroom. And the most important part of this is with parental permission. So this means you have talked to the parent and agreed that they're okay with the teacher and the classroom knowing what their disability is. So you want to establish basic principles. Let each student share, and you can use morning meetings to do that. Dispel any myths. Address the challenges the student may face. Talk about the people we know with a disability. Highlight famous people and their contributions. Always give disability awareness lessons. And then all this would help you hopefully make a positive classroom community. So let me reiterate, if if after consulting with the parent, this is the strategy or how you want to handle things to make sure that the students are feeling accepted and included, then these are just some 8 tips to do that. When you're having these discussions, are topics about diversity or inclusion, and these are when you're formally talking about it, because you're always going to be incorporated into the curriculum. But here are some ground rules that you can use to follow. So if you haven't downloaded the PowerPoint, you may want to take a snapshot with your phone of this. But you should encourage the group to be honest and willing to share, to listen with curiosity and willingness to learn, resist the desire to interrupt, especially if you're doing activities that call for a lot of talking and you have a larger group. Try to understand by asking questions, clarifying and reflecting on what you hear before you respond. Think critically not only about other perspectives, but also about your own. Use I statements. And we talked about that last week with our conflict resolution webinar. Avoid critiquing others' experiences and don't engage in name calling. Suspend judgment and be brief. And if you're doing this activity with high school students, I would also ask them, what ground rules do they want to follow? So that way you can get them involved. And then post these ground rules somewhere visible so that people can see them. And here are, if you need some strategies to promote discussion, discussions that will promote and lead to a more inclusive classroom. Here are some ideas. Once again, take a picture with your phone if you don't have the PowerPoint. Ask for students to bring in articles or video clips that relate to the discussion topic and briefly introduce them to the class. Assign students to teams in which they apply course concepts to current events or issues. Ask each group to share 1 or 2 major points from their work with the larger class. Creating think pair shares. Ask the class a question, but have students individually write down their responses. Then ask students to pair up with someone they don't know. Provide explicit instructions about what you would like each person to share with their partner. Let the class know that after a few minutes, you will indicate time is up and ask the person who's not yet shared to do so. After the pair discussion is concluded, reconvene the class and ask if anyone would like to volunteer one thing they learned. This gets students to talk about their experiences and their diverse backgrounds. And then finally, the round. A question is asked to the class and each person has the opportunity to respond briefly to the question. If a student does not wish to participate, he or she can pass. Provide alternative means of contributing to the discussion, such as allowing questions or comments to be submitted on note cards. And if you have middle school students, shy students, this is something you may have to role model, pick topics that you think maybe your most shy student would be interested in that would encourage them to talk and be part of the discussion. So think about those strategies that you can do to make sure that everyone is involved, and morning meetings is a great opportunity to do this. Here are some more strategies for inclusion. We want to put a lot of tools in your toolkit to be able to implement this. Begin at the end. So whatever your end goal is, whether it be your program objectives, your outcomes, whatever your lesson is, make use of backward planning to ensure daily lesson planning aligns with year-end goals. Embrace universal design to make the curriculum accessible to all students regardless of their unique needs. Apply multiple intelligence theory, which will aid in accessing the unique pathways by which each student processes information. Incorporate life skills training by using routine classroom tasks to create learning opportunities for special education students. Employ collaborative teaching techniques by partnering with special education teacher and others. And then formulate a flexible behavior management plan by maintaining control of the classroom in a manner that adapts to the needs of special education students. And we talked about these specific strategies in the create section of our tips. So you may want to revisit them to get more information. But these are some strategies you can implement or share with your teams, your grade team or your school to see, and also use it as checklists. Are you doing this? So you can measure how you are embracing the idea of inclusive education. Earlier, we talked about using people-first language. The difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and the lightning bug, and that's a quote from Mark Twain. So you want to make sure you do not equate a person with a disability. People-first language tells what a person has, not what a person is. And I know with those on the line, I'm preaching to the choir, but just a good reminder. And also, if you wanted to share this PowerPoint with parents or others, then this would be good for them to realize. The child who has a learning disability, instead of saying the child is learning disabled or the learning disabled child. Emphasize abilities, not limitations. Avoid negative words that imply deficits. Refrain from using special, so never call students special, to indicate separate or segregated, and encourage respect, understanding, and positive language. And some of this it's learned behavior, it's part of the vernacular, so it's just all us recognizing and making a better effort to use some people first language. Here's another quote I thought from Albert Einstein that I thought was relevant to our presentation. Everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. So this talks about our assessments and how it's important that we have, while we hold students to the same high expectations, that we make sure that we measure what we're teaching and that our assessments are accurate and really factor in our differentiated instruction and our inclusion. So you want to make sure you measure that something that's going to lead to success rather than something that's not even part of what is in the curriculum. Here are some resources that you can click on to help you create a more inclusive classroom. We have the website for the Center for Culturally Responsive Teaching and Learning, Teaching Tolerance, Celebrating Cultural Diversity Through Children's Literature, the Cooperative Children's Book Center, International Reading Association, and Children's Book Council. So these are just a few of the many resources that are available to help you create that more inclusive classroom through the curriculum and the objects you are selecting to enhance student learning and measure student performance. So in conclusion, and I'm also going to try to attempt to show a video, so we're going to see if that works. But just some conclusion thoughts in case the video doesn't work. Diversity and inclusion teaches students to celebrate and understand differences. Understanding inclusion allows teachers to be more efficiently enact transfer to their students, so the transfer of knowledge from the paper to the brain, and the variety of mindsets and learning styles that are out there will assist. And then teachers have a duty to their students and society to prepare students to live, work, and thrive in a diverse world of tomorrow. Once students graduate, go to high school and then graduate, maybe they will go to college or maybe they will go into the workforce. Either way, we know it's a growing, it's going to be a more diverse world that they're in, especially here in the state of Florida. And we need to prepare them for that. And creating that inclusion and that multicultural education is going to be one way to give them the competitive advantage and prepare them for the real world. I also like this graphic. So this should be our philosophy. We talked about assumption before. So this should be our new philosophy. Instead of some belong, we need to think that each belongs. Instead of some can learn, we need to believe that everyone can learn. Instead of charity and pity, we believe that rights and justice with responsibility. And when you add all that up, instead of exclusion, we will have inclusion. And it starts with identifying yourself. If you have negative feelings towards a student, it may not appear verbally, but it may appear non-verbally, and the student may pick up on that. So recognize what your difference is, what the vibe and the aura that you may be coming across, and just make an effort to work on that. If anything, if your hands are tied with working on the curriculum or enhancing the curriculum to be more inclusive, then that you can at least do that. All right, so we're going to try and watch this video, and I'm going to have Dr. Miller see if this is happening or not. So I believe I'm sharing my screen. So I'm going to click on this. Oh, hold on one second. Bear with me, and I want you to make sure you have your volume up. I'm ending my show. So hopefully you're still seeing my screen, my lovely desktop. All right, so I'm going to play the video, and then we've had challenges with sound, so.
We hear it perfectly, Dr. Rosa. Thank you.
So that was the story of Ian, and I thought that was extremely relevant, and shows you the power of creating an inclusive classroom. All of us in our classrooms, we have someone like Ian who's on the playground, experiencing and having different dynamics with students. And as a teacher, you can create an environment where everyone can come together, treat everybody as individuals, and really help students like Ian and each student have a positive experience and give them that opportunity to feel included and loved. So that was a video that I came across that I thought was relevant for today's. So that's all I have. Does anyone have any questions or in the chat, or can you even hear me anymore?
We hear you very well. I know we also have a phone call-in listener, so we can, if the person that's on the line wants to speak, you have the ability to do so. We have as well an email address that I wanted to share with you, the person that's calling in. Please feel free to email us at ku-mdc@kaiseruniversity.edu if you would like to have a copy of today's presentation. So I just wanted to let the caller know. But of course, if anybody else in the webinar has any questions or comments for Dr. Rosa, please feel free to type that in the chat or let us know.